now, behind enemy lines. Hey there, how you doing, folks? Gene Baradelli, Ross Galloway here. It has been a week for me, buddy. I haven't. This is the first time I've been back on the channel since like Thursday because I got into a car wreck. I had to deal with like rent a car BS. Had to deal with going to court and doing my normal stuff. And boy, do I need this. This could be like a little therapeutic for me, pal.
Gene, you think you're having a bad week? Imagine that poor dude who crashed into you finding out that he crashed into a lawyer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was certainly a shock to him finding that out. Thankfully, I'm okay. Thank God. Knock on wood. Nothing bad has happened to me. I'm here. I've just been catching up on so much home stuff that I haven't been able to do this, and kind of happy to be back now. And like I said, it's going to be therapeutic. Hanging out with my boy, and we'll be talking some politics. Want to thank everybody who's showing up early so far. I see guys coming into the show live. Appreciate you being around here. Ross, we're going to be talking about Tim Walz a lot. This was actually what we were going to be talking about last week. And it just turns out that there's more and more information coming out about this guy that I think needs to be known. And I think we need to do it in such a way that we speak almost from experience. The reason why this show is called Behind Enemy Lines, folks, is two things. One, me being from the People's Republic of New York, Ross formerly from this area, that we are Republicans behind enemy lines, but also as a tribute to Ross Galloway's service in the Guard. I'm not going to say what state, but in the National Guard. Brag on yourself a little bit and tell everybody your military background. I know that you're retired now, but tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Well, I'll say this, Gene. The two of us have spent more time behind enemy lines than Tim Walz. I can say that right now. You know, yeah. It's kind of weird. My military background is almost, or I'll say it's very similar to Tim Walz, believe it or not. We both were in the National Guard. He did 24 years and retired. I did 27. We were both field artillerymen. We both wore the rank of Command Sergeant Major. I got to retire at that rank because I actually legitimately held it where he did not. Our units both got orders to go to Iraq back in 04, 05. I went and he did not. And I'm pretty sure that's where we're going to pick up today with, the differences between us two, I should say.
Absolutely. We're going to pick up from there. And of course, a quick reminder to everybody, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to join us in the chat, you're more than welcome to. In fact, I got to put the chat banner up because I'm a moron. And we're going to be talking about Tim Walz's military service. Now, let's be clear about something. I don't think that either of us are here to denigrate his service. Let's start with that. I don't think that we're going to be here bashing about what he did, what he didn't do. But we want to clear up exactly what he did, at least according to what we're hearing in the press, and then differentiate that from what he's been saying. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, it's 100%. I mean, had he just ran around saying, I served temporarily as an E9, I retired as an E8 because I didn't finish the school I was supposed to finish because I wanted to run for Congress, and I did 24 years honorably. And if he never intimated that he actually deployed into a combat zone, he'd be a really legitimate politician, in my view, right? Even though he's on the Democratic side of the aisle. But as you're going to prove with various clips, that's not what he did, right? He blurs the lines to make people believe that he was deployed into, hostile or combat zones, really. And it's just not true. And that's right. Where we're going after him, right? Nobody's denigrating his service. But you can't blur the lines. Omission is worse than lying in some cases when it comes to this stuff.
But and in a deeper sense, I want you to give me also the backfill about how Tim Walz is viewed by other veterans. We're going to be playing some clips from veterans that served with him, or at least say that they served with him. Again, we have no personal knowledge. We've done no verification of this. This is what's out there in social media, what's out there in the press. I think that the most damning evidence you can have about someone's leadership ability is the words of those who they sought to lead. And if these veterans are representative of the majority of the people that Tim Walz was leading in the military, he doesn't sound like a great leader to me. And I think we should get into some of those clips right now. I want to start with a veteran who served in the Minnesota Guard. His name is Paul Herr, and he had some comments. We cut them down. We found this on social media. I believe this is courtesy of Alpha Minnesota. Check them out on the Twitters. And let's listen to what Paul had to say here.
He uses a mythical rank that he wasn't allowed to retire with, that he never enrolled into the academy. He only maybe wore the rank for a total of 14 days on the ground. So he has zero experience in any sergeant. I was a sergeant major for almost 13 years. That's almost a career for some people. I did the time. I've been to combat, been back. Been at high levels, and it's very frustrating. We wouldn't be saying anything if he just would have retired, said he was a retired master sergeant, retired first sergeant, and just carried on about his business. The problem that we have with is that he's trying to get credibility with the military and with the public by fabricating some lofty position that in reality he never really held and he has zero experience at.
Okay, so Ross, I want you to go into that. You held this rank, you retired with this rank. This is the highest enlisted rank you can earn, correct?
Correct. As far as pay grades, E9 is the highest you can get. A command sergeant major is basically the highest you can get on the enlisted side. There's only one that is higher on paper. It is the command sergeant major sergeant major of the Army. There's only one. He works at the Pentagon, right? But that's like a political appointment, right? So for all intents and purposes, E9, command sergeant major, that is the highest enlisted rank. Even the sergeant major of the Army is an E9, right? So there
Gotcha.
His position that he would be higher.
Okay, so now what's the difference between a command sergeant major and sergeant major? Because that's ultimately what Walz retired as.
No, so the E9 in the enlisted pay scales have two ranks that you can hold. You can either be a sergeant major or a command sergeant major. They're both E9s. You have to go to the sergeant major academy for both of those ranks, right? A command sergeant major means you're in a leadership position, and a sergeant major means you're on a staff somewhere doing staff type work. I've done both of those positions. Command sergeant major a little more sexy. You know, you're the battalion commander or whatever level of command, echelon of command. You're the commander's senior enlisted advisor at that unit. So you can be at a battalion, a brigade, a division, and so on. So Walz wound up retiring as a master sergeant, which is an E8, because he didn't meet the qualifications to retire at E9.
Okay, so that's a step below even sergeant major, right?
Correct.
Am I getting this right?
Correct. And the reason why Walz did not – so Walz, in order to make E9, you have to be selected, especially in the National Guard, by your state, right? Your state sergeant major, the highest ranking sergeant major in your state, selects you to go to the academy, right? The Department of the Army actually selects you to become E9, but in order to go to the academy to actually achieve and keep the rank, you have to be selected by your state sergeant major. And each state gets only a limited number of seats each year. And before you go to that school, which is 18 to 24 months, depending on when we're talking about here, 18 to 24 months long. In the reserves, it's probably a remote course. If you go in person, it's 6 months straight, right? So it's a very intense course. They brief you like, hey, man, we only got X number of slots this year. Are you 100% committed to going to this school and finishing and serving an additional 2 years at the rank of sergeant major to be able to keep it to retirement? They encourage you not to answer right away. Go home, talk to your family, think it through, see if your civilian job lines up with this. You come back, you give them the answer, and then you knuckle down for you're committing basically to 4 more years, right? 2 years for the school, another 2 years in a duty assignment. Walz went through that. He agreed. He gave his word. And then he did not complete the course and retired mid-contract. He signed a 6-year enlistment contract, retired after 3 or 4 while he was supposed to go to the academy. And why did he do that?
Because of deployment. At least that's the word, right?
Yeah, that's the word, right? They're playing games with the dates on that now. They're saying, well, the unit didn't deploy until like March or April, and he put it in his retirement in January or February. Here's the problem with that. At his rank, if he was indeed the command sergeant major of his battalion back then, the military or the Army specifically does something called a notice of sourcing, a NOS, N-O-S. A unit will get a notification of sourcing months before they go out the door on a deployment. That is to tell the unit you have X number of dollars to start training, do additional drills, all these things. So if he was indeed in a senior leadership position, he would have known months before deployment that thing was coming. So it's even more, all the more suspicious why he put in his retirement paperwork only a couple of months before the actual order came down to deploy, right? So to me, I would have to just say he ducked out of deployment, claimed he wanted to run for Congress. He went back on his word that he gave all the people in his chain of command that he would knuckle down, finish the school, and serve an additional 2 years.
Okay, and now how does that look to the people under his command? Let's say that this notice of sourcing comes out. Everyone knows that they're going to be deployed, and all of a sudden your CSM puts in to retire. How does that look as part of the culture?
So can you picture this? Now, a field artillery battalion is somewhere around 500 people, right? And back then it was 500 men, because back in those days, females weren't allowed in the field artillery, most likely. So you're talking about 500 dudes from ages 18, into their 50s, possibly. All of them are reservists in the National Guard unit, meaning they have real lives. Some of them are in college, some of them are having babies, some of them are, have demanding jobs where a deployment will actually cost them money. So now you have to wrangle 500 individuals to get them on board to go to Iraq. And it wasn't Iraq, in 2010, 2011, which was still dangerous, by the way. But we're talking about 2004, 2005, when the insurgency was going off the chain, right? We had to do that surge in 2008 to try to get it back under control. So for your senior enlisted leader in the battalion, the senior guy out of 500 people on the enlisted side, to duck that deployment, that is pure cowardice and could cause chaos in the ranks. The E9s, especially this E9 that you have on the screen, that are talking smack on Tim Walz, that's almost unheard of, right? To be E9, you have to spend so much time in service. You have to jump through so many hoops. You have to dedicate your life to the military and go to that demanding course. You basically join like a brotherhood or the E9 mafia. To talk crap about another one, they deserve it, right? Walz is not an E9, really never was, didn't retire at it, ducked a deployment, and let his people down. And I could sense the frustration in this man's tone.
Speaking of the E9 mafia, as you put it, there was also another video by Alpha Minnesota that was put out I think it was a year ago or a couple of years ago. Actually, this video from Paul Herr was not from 2024. This is from when he was running for governor of Minnesota, believe it or not. Here's another video from the command sergeant major who actually succeeded Tim Walz, and he has a lot to say. And Ross, I'm going to stop this intermittently because I want to talk about describing the chaos that this CSM would have had to deal with after Walz retired.
Oh, how pathetic his leadership was as a National Guardsman.
On a 150-year-old farm in Brewster, Tom Behrens hopes his tell-it-like-it-is style will finally get the attention he believes it deserves in Minnesota's race for governor. In a way, he's back again to wage a public war of words against Tim Walz.
Like I said, this was back when he was running for governor, so this is a story that's been out there in Minnesota for a good long while.
He abandoned us.
Kamala,
go ahead, what?
And what about when Kamala was supposedly vetting this guy? Either they knew this was out there or they didn't really vet the guy, right?
Or they didn't give a crap. Or they didn't give a crap at all. All right, let's get to see what I believe his last name is Behrens. CSM Behrens retired has to say.
What the hell kind of leader does that? I mean, he just, as soon as the shots were fired in Iraq, he turned and ran the other way and hung his hat up and quit.
We'll get to Behrens' new message for voters in a moment. But this all starts years earlier when Behrens says Walz's misleading statements about his military service first led him to come forward in the fall of 2018. So you try to get this message out, but Minnesota's largest newspaper checks it out, says it's 100% true, but yet refuses to print.
When I hung the phone up, I said, what the hell is this, North Korea?
Back in 2005, a warning order went out to the 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery to mobilize for a mission to Iraq.
Is that what you were talking about earlier, the notice of sourcing?
So a warning order would come, yes, the warning order would come right after the notice of sourcing, yes.
Okay, does it come quickly on the heels of it, or like when you're about to be imminently deployed?
It could depend, right? If in 0405, it might have been kind of quick, to be honest, because they didn't expect like stuff to be that crazy.
Got it. Okay, let's continue on here.
At the time, Walz served as the unit's highest non-commissioned officer, but months later, Walz would retire from the Guard, avoid the deployment, and run for Congress. Tom Behrens was next in line for the position and was asked to take his place.
I was like, well, for Pete's sake, if this guy quit, and if I say I'm not going to do it, I mean, what the hell kind of leadership is that? If a company would say that we're going to deploy to Iraq or somewhere and you're going to be gone for whatever amount of time, and then a foreman just says, no, I'm not going. I mean, what does that say to the 500 people that work in that factory?
Behrens would go on to serve in Iraq on a nearly 2-year deployment as a command sergeant major. All while Walz began using that title as a congressman. Behrens says he first contacted Walz with his concerns, sending these letters to Washington. They all went unanswered.
Now, you were talking about how it's unheard of for people at this rank to go at each other, right? He's sending letters. So this guy gets into office while, I guess, Behrens is deployed for 2 years, by the way. And Walz is not responding back. Is this coming from him or his office, do you think? Do you think that Walz would have most likely answered if he was actually a man of honor, I guess? Or do you think maybe it didn't get to him because he was in office and they're protecting him, like the people around him?
I think Walz 100% knew, and whether he knew the letter existed or not, he would have done the same exact thing. There is no way that he thought that he retired as an E9. No way. I know his initial retirement paper actually did say it, and then a couple of months later, the Minnesota Guard caught up and did a correction to his discharge to put the correct rank as E8 Master Sergeant. But there is no way that Walz thought that he could retire at E9. Everyone that is getting close to 20 years in the military starts studying how to retire. As an E9, you have to be able to train your subordinates on what they need to do to retire. So he knew what the qualifications were to retire at that rank, and he knew he did not achieve them. Whether he thought he slipped one past the National Guard Bureau or the Department of the Army to retire at that rank, either way, unacceptable, right? He knew he was not a retired E9. He knew it.
And now let's talk about Behrens for a second. What kind of world of let's call it for what it is. What kind of world of shit did he walk into?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine going to war in a position that you did not hold up until a few weeks before you deployed, right? The command sergeant major's job, he's the senior enlisted advisor to the commander on all enlisted matters. He's also in charge of enforcing standards within the battalion, maintaining good order and discipline, and overseeing that all training is conducted to standard. So this guy, Behrens, just took a unit to war that he did none of that with, right? Because Walz was supposed to be doing all of that. And then on the day of the Super Bowl, the guy took a knee and dropped out of the game. Unbelievable.
Let's keep going.
But then we fast forward to the election in 2018 in Minnesota, and you try at that time to get people's attention with this story and also with what seems to be a very misleading statement that he continued to make about his service.
It kind of just sat there, when he was a congressman, he bragged that he was a command sergeant, retired command sergeant major. I'm the highest ranking person ever in the House, and all this lie that he was telling. The state of Minnesota came out after 2018, after this was exposed, and they said, well, he can say that he served as a command sergeant major, but he can't say he's a retired one because he's not.
And that's what
Now, this is also something that I know that you have experience in because we worked in politics together, and we've had candidates who have had military service, and they want to use that in publicity materials, either mailers or commercials or what have you. There are very strict rules about what you can say and what you cannot say when it comes to advertising yourself and your service for political purposes, right?
There are. I'm not sure Walz, other than the Stolen Valor Act, which came out well after a lot of this stuff, I'm not sure Walz actually violated any of that. You just can't really do anything that may imply that the Department of Defense is endorsing you as a candidate, right? You can use one of your old pictures of yourself in uniform, but you have to like put a disclaimer on there saying that, I served, and this in no way implies that the United States Army or the Department of Defense is endorsing me as a candidate. But what you can't do is lie about awards or service or certain titles, right? So now you're in a gray area with him. That's why they issued that statement where I guess he could say he served in the position, because technically as an E8, you could even serve in the position, right? Let's say your sergeant major dies in combat. Well, the E8 that is under him will serve as a sergeant major for a little while until another E9 comes along or until that guy gets promoted. But does that mean he was a sergeant major? Not really, right? He couldn't retire at the rank. So I think Walz in a gray area. I know some of the videos you're going to play later. He's definitely implying, if not through omission, that he deployed to Afghanistan, right? Which is certainly not true. Provably not true.
Right. All right, well, let's keep going with this. This is a very interesting interview. By the way, guys, no matter where you are, I'm checking all the chats everywhere. So if you're on Rumble chatting, I'll be getting to you in a second. If you're on the YouTubes, we get the chats popping up here. Feel free to drop us a line here. We'll be glad to talk to you as well.
He was saying.
And he was saying that, and there was lots of lots of cards coming in the mail, for him to be elected. They said right on there he's a retired command sergeant major, just tooting his own horn, just hanging on the coattails of people that actually are command sergeant majors that went through all the process and put all the time in.
A spokesperson for the Minnesota National Guard said Walz wasn't able to retire as a command sergeant major since he failed to complete coursework and requirements related to the rank. Verified documents show the Army corrected his service record. Walz was reduced in rank to an E8 Master Sergeant after retirement and his conditional promotion. Alpha News again asked Governor Walz if he's using the Command Sergeant Major rank on his campaign website for political gain this year. A spokesperson said this has been in the news before and pointed us to a past story where Walz said, quote, "Normally this type of partisan political attack only comes from one who's never worn a uniform."
It's stolen valor is really what it is.
Is it stolen valor or is that hyperbole?
It's damn close, right? But I do want to just go back to what his statement said. I despise when someone says something like, these type of attacks only come from people who probably never wore the uniform. What the hell does that mean, right? You can't have an opinion on abortion if you're not a woman. Like, these are just idiotic statements, right? Any objective person can have an opinion on this. You just showed a document that shows that they had to correct his rank back to E8, but on his own political website, it still says E9, right? So what, only military people can say something? Well, here's a military guy that you're interviewing right now, the guy who actually replaced him, CSM Burns, right? So should we listen to him? Okay, we can listen to military people. Let's listen to this guy then. Where is Tim Walz, by the way? He gave a speech the other day saying the same thing, basically, that no one should denigrate his military service. I don't think anybody is, right? They're calling out his lies.
And I think that's where a lot of the hyperbole, though, is where people take it too far. Everyone in politics tend to take things to the nth degree. So when you use phrases like stolen valor, and that could be a debatable point, you're opening up vectors of attack from the other side saying, how dare you even say that? Sort of giving up the high ground here, in my opinion, at least from the analysis of a political campaign. And while I understand that he served as a command sergeant major, and you could probably say that he served that, he can't say he retired as that, it feels dishonest, at least from the outside looking in, to sort of hide the ball and play word games like this. Being an attorney, I'm used to being confronted with word games all the time. So when I hear and see material like this, it gets me a little upset. Like, why are you playing hide the ball here? If your service is honorable, and clearly, listen, you were there for 2 decades. Can't just be defined by one moment. I'm sure he served well and I thank him for his service. But at the same time, you're going out there and you're saying things that are shaded, possibly true, partially true, true under a certain point of view. And it just frustrates me, especially now you're on a national stage and you're saying, this is who I am, and you're not being totally honest with me.
Yeah, and like you said, it's the quantity, right? It's not like he was sort of evasive one time or sort of vague once or twice. Like the guy over and over and over again intimates that he was there and that he was a certain rank, and he wasn't. Like, it's just a lie. I don't know if you have the clip where he says, we need to ban these weapons of war that I carried in war. What war did he carry a weapon in?
I can certainly get that in a moment.
How did he make that mistake?
I should have pulled that one, but let's take some clips from even back before he was governor, when he was in Congress, talking about PTSD, which, by the way, it's an issue we take very seriously here on the show. We have a friend that suffers from PTSD, got into programs with MDMA and turned his life around amazingly. This is an issue that's near and dear to us. This is Tim Walz in Congress, and I want you to listen to the language he uses when talking about his service, or is he talking about his service? Let's get to that.
How this works, especially from National Guard families. I can tell you this, having been one of those that came back, we were in support of OEF, but sitting in there with OIF veterans, when we came back, they showed us the horse whisperer and told us to be nice when we went home. And that was the extent of it. That was in 2004. Now,
so that made it sound like he was in Iraq or he was in Afghanistan, because he returned from support from OEF and OIF. I got that right. OEF is Operation Enduring Freedom. OIF is Operation Iraqi Freedom, right?
Yes. And you see the way he blurred the lines there, right? When we came back. And, I was with Operation Enduring Freedom, but we were with guys from Operation Iraqi Freedom. Okay, so what is he implying there?
No, but he also said in support of.
He liked to throw that in there. But you could be in support of an operation anywhere around the world, right? Doesn't mean that no one in the military that I know of has ever said, I'm an OEF veteran, unless they were in Afghanistan. It's impossible you would get laughed at if you said, and the telltale sign will be this. And here's where the stolen valor could come in. Does he wear a combat patch on his uniform? I'm going to have to look at all of his pictures and see if he does, right? Because you definitely can't earn a combat patch in support of an operation from Italy. Can't do it, right? So I'd love to see if he wears that.
Now, hold on one second, because I want you to, this is an important point to make. We've dealt with other candidates who have been veterans, and there's been questions about what medals you could wear, what medals you couldn't wear at certain times based upon what portion of the Guard or the military that you were attached to, what unit, what division, whatever it may be. Can there be photos out there of him wearing some sort of, company badge rather than an individual badge that might be relevant to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, the two things for people to look out for, and I'll start digging in this week, but anyone who's listening should look at this too. Are there any pictures of him in a camouflage uniform with a patch on his right shoulder? If he has a patch on his right shoulder, that is a combat patch. And I would love to know how he got it. The second thing to look out for is we need to get a picture of him in his dress uniform and zoom in on the ribbon rack on the left side of his uniform, on his left side. And we look at each individual award that he's wearing. If he's wearing one for the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary or an Afghanistan campaign medal or an OEF medal ribbon on his uniform, then that's definitely stolen valor, right? Like, just what I mean. Like, he's getting close. He's basically saying he was there, but if he's wearing anything on a uniform that the guy's earned that actually went there, he's going to have a real problem.
But what is it possible for some of his guys to have gone to Afghanistan and therefore the unit gets to wear a badge? Does that happen?
You could get a unit citation, which would be on the other side of his dress uniform. It would be on his right side. So it is possible he would be in a unit that got awarded that. I don't know the specifics of the deployment he went on into Italy with. Did they split his unit where some of them went to Afghanistan and some of them stood in Italy? Or did he deploy as an augmentee with only a handful of guys and it wasn't with a unit? Sometimes National Guardsmen get deployed in small numbers and get attached to an active duty unit. So maybe they only needed one E8 and 3 E5s. And those guys got picked from Minnesota and they backfilled some active duty unit that went to Italy, right? So I don't know the specifics of his, but I guess like if his whole battalion went overseas, some of them could have wound up in Afghanistan and some of them could have went to Italy. Highly doubt it, especially at the rank he claims he was. That would be nearly impossible that the senior enlisted guy would duck out and go to Italy while the ground troops went to Afghanistan. Almost impossible.
That's very interesting to know. Left side, right side, depending on everything matters in the military.
They wear their resume on their uniform. So as soon as I get a look at his dress uniform, I'll be able to tell exactly what he claims he did.
All right. Now we're going to go into another clip here. I think it's from 2007 as well, where he uses the same sort of evasive language. We got to get through this part, though. Get there.
Now, I'm proud to say that because of the people sitting in here and people who came before me, things have changed over the last 4 years. They have not changed enough. But Mr. Kennedy is following and moving something forward that the late senator from Minnesota, Senator Wellstone, advocated so clearly, mental health parity in this issue.
Interestingly enough, and I didn't even know this, I interned for Congressman Kennedy in this photo right here, Patrick Kennedy.
I do remember this.
Yes, I interned with him. I got a photo of him somewhere around here. But yes, I've worked for Democrats. Sue me. I was young. I was impressionable.
Of destigmatizing mental health, of understanding, and I being in there and knowing as a first sergeant, know exactly what you're saying, and watching as people aren't trained on this, that there is there's a discrimination that goes against a soldier who has the courage, the fortitude, and as you said, the insight to admit this. So there's a couple things I want to ask you. And this was early in this conflict, in 2003, 2004, when my unit returned from being deployed, and part of the soldiers in the unit were combat related, that were in that group that came back to the out processing station, and some were not. But we were all grouped together for that. And I think Dr. Bray brought up a good point. You don't check the box to stay as a medical hold. That's a given, and it was very difficult, even with physical injuries, to get people to do that. So that's something that we're working on here, and we brought up many times. But I think on the psychological part, and bringing up what Dr. Rosenberg was talking about, the idea of parity and where it's at, we had extensive physical screenings when we came back. What we got was a 20-minute talk from the chaplain, and they showed us the horse whisperer.
Which is something that you said in the previous clip we just saw, but when we came back, certainly implies to me that he was in these places. He was in either Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever he's talking about here. When we came back, to me, doesn't sound like a differentiation of we came back from Europe or we came back from this place or whatever. It sounds like he's talking about himself and his command, right? Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, and it's very carefully crafted the way he's speaking, right? He's not misspeaking, he's omitting. There's nothing wrong with if he would have said, because everything he's saying is right, by the way, about PTSD and the out processing, especially back then. When you came back, it was a mill. They just wanted to get you, out processed back into your regular life, and then you get right back into the queue because every 3 to 5 years, your unit will be back on the deployment schedule to go back, right? So they just need to get you, out processed, healthy, no medical holds, you're fully deployable, get back to training, and in 3 to 5 years, your ass is going right back to one of those war zones. So I get it. Everything he's saying is right. And there would have been nothing wrong had he just added that extra step of, I myself did not deploy to a combat theater, but the guys that I was out processing with did, and this is what I observed. Right? That would have been so much clearer, cleaner, and admirable, really.
And this kind of gets to my experience with you, pal, because I know that when you talk about your service, the rare occasions that you do, you are very precise in what you say to me, in how you say things to me, because you don't want any misunderstanding. And I assume that's a part of the training. Why is Walz so careless in his characterizations of the experiences he was talking about, especially under oath in front of Congress? I think that was the Rules Committee or something like that. When you're under oath there, why is there such a cavalier approach to these explanations?
And that's if it was careless, right? Because I'm starting to think it wasn't. Like, he carefully chose his words each time he said these things. He never, as far as I know, he's never flat out said, I was slinging guns in Afghanistan. The closest he came was that clip that I don't think we have, was the one where he said weapons of war, like I carried in war, right? Like, that definitely was over the top. But I don't think he's ever said I was in Afghanistan. But he's never, on the flip side, he's never said I did not go to Afghanistan or Iraq, right? He's never said the opposite either. He's very careful with his wording. He's just a slimy guy. And like I said earlier, that's why these other E9s are coming out and attacking him, right? Because it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. By the way, I'm going to stall for time here to try to get that clip for you. We're at halftime here, folks, or at least a little past halftime. I want to thank everybody for tuning into this show. We are Behind Enemy Lines. I'm Gene. He's Ross. And while I got you on the internet, because I know you're on the internet, because we are all over the internet right now on YouTube, on the Twitters or X or whatever you want to call it, and on the Rumbles, please subscribe wherever you're at. Follow us wherever you're at. I would really appreciate that. While we're looking for this clip, and by the way, I just found it and we're going to be going into it, I want to talk about this comment that Walz made. We're sort of going through time with him now. We went through the time he was in Congress and the time he was in Minnesota governor. What about this comment about 19-year-old cooks and the disparagement he used about the use of the National Guard in the context of the George Floyd mostly peaceful protests and what we call riots in common parlance? Let's go back to this just on the street interview that Walz did and listen to how he characterizes the Guard.
Guard, and what does that mean? I think to the mayor, yes, I think it's a perception. I'm certainly not questioning that. I think the mayor said I request a National Guard. Phew, I'm out. This is great. We're going to have massively trained troops. No, you're going to have 19-year-olds who are cooks in some cases. And what are we going to do and how are we going to use them?
Now, let's be clear. You've been a part of deployments with the Guard that you served in for security issues at home, right?
Yeah, lots of them.
Were you a 19-year-old cook?
The irony is his unit was not 19-year-old cooks. He was in a field artillery combat arms unit. He has, even if he temporarily held the sergeant major position, he was a first sergeant, master sergeant E8. He was a sergeant first class E7. He's held numerous leadership positions within that battalion. With that responsibility is training. So when he says it's a bunch of untrained 19-year-old cooks, I don't understand how he can be that callous towards his own men. Like, that is just, to me, it's astonishing, which why I can see why all these guys are turning on him now, right? He knows that's not true. And if it is true, then he's a douche because he was the one responsible to maintain good order and discipline and train those soldiers.
Well, I'm certainly getting the impression of him being a douche for sure, just from what his own people were saying about him, what Paul Herr was saying, what Command Sergeant Major Barron's retired was saying. By the way, I think I have the clip right now for the guns comment. Let's go to this. Tell me if I got the right one here.
Hope woke up like many of you did 5 weeks ago and said, Dad, you're the only person I know who's in elected office. You need to stop what's happening with this. I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
Weapons of war I carried in war. What is he talking about here?
So now that one, out of all the ones where he was kind of vague and evasive, that one needs to be explained, right? Is he going to say he misspoke? Did you think you were in war once when you really weren't? Like, how do you forget that?
I don't know how. Let's just say I would never say I was in a war.
But I wouldn't have even said it like I was in Iraq, but I would have never said a weapon of war that I carried in Afghanistan, right? Like, if it's that big of an event in your life, you wouldn't mistake it. It's impossible that he did not know what he was saying there. Impossible, right? I just want to roll back one thing. So the 19-year-old Cooks comment, the other thing. So
yes.
And as governor, he definitely knows better than this, right? If he was in the military and he's the governor of a state, he knows better than this. The National Guard has a dual mission, right? A federal mission and a state mission. That's the beauty of the National Guard.
Right.
Federal to deploy overseas, like Iraq, Afghanistan, those types of things. A stateside mission to help, to actually, the governor is their commander-in-chief, right? To put down riots, assist during storms. Basically, to be in support of civil authorities during any man-made or natural disaster, okay? That's really the job of the National Guard unless they get activated by the federal government and get deployed overseas.
Right. When the governor calls for a state of emergency, let's talk about the People's Republic of New York for a second. When the governor calls for a state of emergency for the influx of migrants that are happening in the People's Republic of New York City, the Guard is activated and are deployed to New York City to assist in however they can in that emergency.
Yes.
when there was Superstorm Sandy in the People's Republic of New York.
And
there was a
99%
need for
of the
Guard.
time, Gene, they are in a support role. The National Guard, they never want the lead on a domestic operation, right? Because it just doesn't even look right. If you have soldiers that say U.S. Army on their chest that are in your streets, right? So as governor, he knows this. When the National Guard gets activated, they're usually activated in like a force multiplying support role. For instance, the riots that destroyed Minneapolis, he could have activated the National Guard. Most municipal buildings, especially law enforcement buildings, have to be guarded by police, right? So you're wasting cops guarding a building, checking IDs, and running metal detectors. In the event of a huge disaster like a riot, you can activate the National Guard, and you could put 5 National Guardsmen at that building with 1 police officer, so it's a force multiplying function, right? 1 cop, 5 National Guardsmen to wand people into a law enforcement building. You free up all of those police officers to put them on the street because they're better trained. Because even though the National Guard are not cooks, they're not specifically trained to enforce the law. So you free up the police, the firemen. You can even free up sanitation workers. The National Guard is a very general purpose broadsword that you could throw out there to do lots of different things. It's like a Swiss Army knife to free up the experts to do their job. But he wouldn't even activate them to do that.
Which is telling, especially considering, remember the imagery from 2020 and what was going on there. There were daily, let's be generous and call them protests. There were daily protests in the streets. And, and then the calls after that for defunding the police and police retirements that we saw after that across the nation. And I believe in Minnesota as well, we saw an effort to defund them as well. You would think that this useful tool, the Swiss Army knife, as you called it, would have been great to keep things calm, to keep property and people safe. And yet he chooses on their television in the area to say, yeah, the governor thought that they were getting soldiers. They were going to get 19-year-old cooks.
It almost sounds accurate. Right? And it almost sounds like he's bitter towards the Army for some reason when he says something like that. I was going to ask that. Bitter.
Yeah. I was going to actually ask that. Is this sour grapes?
Yeah, it sounds like it is to me, right? Maybe he thought he did deserve to keep that rank, or he didn't deserve people speaking out against him when he was running for office.
Or it could be that his experience was not great because the people he was tasked to lead didn't follow him because he wasn't fit to lead. And maybe that's just my personal opinion of all this.
I think you might be right. The guy ducked out.
I mean, Ross, let's be honest here. When you have the chaplain of National Guard saying that you're a coward or you acted cowardly, that to me says a lot. This is a story from the New York Post. Chaplain of Tim Walz's National Guard Battalion calls VP pick cowardly for abandoning unit. Just want to get into the crux of this article here. The chaplain of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's Field Artillery Regiment said there is no excuse for the Democratic VP pick to abandon his National Guard unit before a critical deployment, not even running for Congress. Quote, in our world, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, tell me if you agree or disagree, Ross, in our world, to drop out after what's a warnord? That's a warning order, it says here. What's a warnord?
Warning order is just telling you to start getting ready. You're going somewhere. You're doing something.
Warn ord. Okay, I screwed that up badly. In our world, to drop out after a warn ord is issued is cowardly, especially for a senior enlisted guy. Retired Captain Corey Bjertness, now a pastor in North Dakota, told the New York Post. Bjertness was the chaplain for the 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery, of which Walz was command sergeant. And they see a photo of him right here. Running for Congress is not an excuse. Bjertness said of Walz's decision to quit, I stopped everything and went to war. I let my wife and 3 teenagers and a 6-year-old, and I was gone for 19 months. And then we also talked about Tom Barons, who we were talking about earlier. The command sergeant major who replaced Walz said, quote, he had the opportunity to serve his country and said, screw you to the United States. Is there anything from either Tom Barons or from the chaplain that you disagree with?
No, and like I was saying earlier, and the chaplain put it pretty nicely, right? When that warning order comes down and you know for sure it's going to be followed by an actual operations order or an order to deploy, a deployment order, a mobilization order, you have 500 people, civilians, that have their lives. You know, the chaplain's talking about his children, and it's 19 months away from home. You have 500 people. Many of them are going to claim some type of hardship in order to not deploy. It's just the nature of the beast when you have 500 people. They're not all Rambo. They're not all looking to deploy, right? Some kids just joined for college, whatever it is. I appreciate their service and everything else, but lots of people don't want to deploy. The two people that they always ask to speak to when they're trying to get out of a deployment to claim a hardship, the chaplain and the sergeant major. And in that scenario, the sergeant major probably spoke to the chaplain himself to get out of the damn deployment. It's astonishing. That unit, the morale of that unit had to be shot before they went out the door.
Well, listen, it's one thing for an enlisted man of lower rank to not want to be deployed. I think that's understandable. A lot of these people have lives that they're going to be leaving behind, jobs that they're leaving behind. They sign up to, for a weekend a month, and they're doing their service, and good on them. But then there's Tim Walz, who had been in the service for decades. Is there not a difference between the guy who's there for a couple of years and then leaves versus a lifer like Walz in the actions that were taken here?
100%. The NCO creed is too long to recite. I don't want to waste all the time on here. But when you get a chance, if anyone listening, go look up the United States Army NCO creed and read that. Tim Walz was supposed to live by that. I will always place the mission first, right? And then followed up by and the welfare of my soldiers. He did neither. He put himself first. That was not selfless service, which is an Army value. The Army values are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. He showed none of those Army values when that warning order came down.
I'm looking for the creed right now. I think I can put it up on the screen while you're talking here, pal.
It's quite long.
I see that. I see that. I believe this is it here. Let me pull it up on the screen. Still getting used to some of the buttons here, folks, so bear with me. Here we go. Share screen. I don't know if this is right, but this is what I found.
Just so no one is more professional than I.
Yep. No one is more professional than I. I am a non-commissioned officer, a leader of soldiers. As a non-commissioned officer, I realize that I am a member of a time-honored corps, which is known as the backbone of the Army. I'm not going to read any more of that. But in the words
read the beginning of the last paragraph, officers of my unit.
Okay. Officers of my, I'm going to zoom in on this. Officers of my unit will have maximum time to accomplish their duties. They will not have to accomplish mine. I will earn their respect and confidence as well as that of my soldiers. I will be loyal to those with whom I serve, seniors, peers, and subordinates alike. I will exercise initiative by taking appropriate action in the absence of orders. I will not compromise my integrity nor my moral courage. I will not forget, nor will I allow my comrades to forget that we are professionals, non-commissioned officers, leaders.
Does that sound like Tim Walz to you?
It sounds freaking heavy is what it sounds like to me, pal. This is not something you take up lightly.
And he sure did take it kind of lightly. I was thinking of something earlier, Gene, which is actually kind of funny when you think about it. Donald Trump has spent more time in Iraq and Afghanistan than Tim Walz.
That's true.
That is a fact.
Wow. That's not a line that comes out during this whole thing. It better come out. That's a great line to use.
It's a great line.
Now, in comparison, I think J.D. Vance also served as well. We haven't really scheduled to talk about him, but he's a military man. Under Tim Walz's own standard, isn't he entitled to question Walz's service?
Yeah, absolutely. And J.D. Vance was also very careful with the way he worded things. Now, J.D. Vance did, in fact, go to Iraq, right? But he was a public affairs, he was in the Marine Corps as a public affairs service member. So, and he's very upfront about it. He says, I deployed to Iraq as a Marine. I was not in a combat zone per se. I'm sure he was still in a combat zone, but he was not actively engaged in combat, right? I cannot find any clips of J.D. Vance saying otherwise or muddying the waters or claiming stuff that wasn't true, right? He's been very upfront. And sometimes interviewers, I think he was on CNN the other day, try to throw that in his face a little bit. And he's like, I'm not denigrating this guy's service. He's like, I've been very upfront about mine. Yes, I went to Iraq. I was not in a combat zone. I never said I was. Right? Walz has done I don't want to say he's done the opposite, because other than that weapons of war clip, he's just really evasive and vague, really.
Right, which leads me to our final discussion of the segment here. We kind of been talking about this already. Do you think the language that Walz used, and we talked about this a little bit already, is he intentionally misleading, or is he just careless? And if he's careless, what does that say about his sort of the optics of politics? How he deals with, political situations? Is he going to be this sloppy in dealing with issues while in office?
Well, I think it's very indicative, really, of the Democratic Party and the position they find themselves in. Because these types of things, even though in the People's Republic of New York, we had a congressman that had some issues with his military service that was a Republican, usually this type of stuff does happen on the Democratic side. The Democrats, they were using that word weird a few weeks ago about Republicans.
Oh, they still are. They still are.
They still are. But they are the weird party, right? Like Tim Walz, executive order to put tampons in boys' bathrooms in school, right? That's pretty weird. The Democrats are desperate because they're shedding men, right? Even black men are leaving the Democratic Party in mass. They're desperate to portray a masculine image and try to get that rural Midwest voter back into their camp. So, like, whenever they find a military veteran, they like go all in hard on it because they need that, because there's not many legitimate veterans. And I'm going to say it, legitimate veterans that identify as Democrats. There's just not.
Well, I mean, we could think of a couple. We could think of like Max Rose out of New York as well. He seems to have had, he had military service, and he seems like an honorable human being. At least he was pretty middle of the road when serving in Congress. Got beat by Nicole and Malliotakis, but his service was never called out or questioned the way that Tim Walz is inviting us to do. And I think that's the main problem here. Tim Walz's own carelessness is inviting these questions. And then when he's confronted with these questions, people are saying, how dare you question him in his service? Like it's some sort of political third rail that you're not supposed to touch here. Yeah. He brought this on himself in a sense, don't you think?
But even with Max Rose, right? Why was he selected to run for that? Back then, it was like the only Republican seat down in downstate New York. Why was he selected to run specifically? Because he had that military record. And the Democratic Party knows that they don't have many of those people, right? They're going to have Tim Walz, I think there's a lot more skeletons in his closet that are going to come out, but they're typical, Chuck Schumer crying on TV and a lot. I can go on and on naming Democrats that are not very masculine, right? So they latch onto these guys. And we opened the show with, I just can't imagine that when he was being vetted, that they didn't come across some of these stories, right? It's hard to believe. They either think that their voters or the American people are so stupid that they're not going to find this stuff out, or that they'll be able to run the Joe Biden basement campaign for the next 90 days or 80 days, whatever's left, and no one will be able to react to it in time like they did with Hunter's laptop the last time.
Yeah, and I have two thoughts on that, by the way. The first thought is there's more to come out besides this military service concern, let's call it. There's stories that have come out already about Tim Walz taking teaching positions in China. There's stories, like as you mentioned, about the tampons in the boys' bathroom. There's stories about his changes to the Born Alive Infant Act that changed things up as far as the aftercare that an infant who survived an abortion would get. And they changed that after several babies actually were born alive after that act, and I think were left to die. They actually died. There's stuff that's going to be coming out about changing the law that was made about mature people being attracted to younger people. There's all this that is out there, and it's sort of the Ross Galloway tennis ball machine theory of politics. Like, you only hit back so many balls that are sent at you rapid fire. And I think that there's time between now and at least the debate in October between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz that's going to come out. But also, I wanted to bring this up with you, and this is something we haven't discussed. Tim Walz does not come to mind as the A-team. It's part of the A-team of the Democratic bench. You think of Gretchen Whitmer. You think of Gavin Newsom. You think of Shapiro in Pennsylvania. Do you think that they were turned down by a lot of people and that they dug into the B team of the party, and maybe those people will have their own presidential aspirations coming up in 2028 or something like that. I don't know. But it seems like they dug into the B team here to get Tim Walz.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this for a while. I might have even said it on one of our old shows that it's almost inevitable, I think, and I still think this, that Donald Trump is going to be the next president. I just think it's impossible for Kamala Harris, who is part of the Biden-Harris administration, to all of a sudden distance herself from Joe Biden, right?
Yeah, I got to knock on wood on this one. I'm knocking on wood. Just knocking on wood.
They didn't want to vote for Joe Biden. I don't understand. Harris is riding some honeymoon thing, and that's if you believe these polls and all that stuff. Like she's riding some kind of wave right now. So I almost think like they were accepting this loss. There was no way to. Remember a few months ago, Gene, they were talking about maybe Joe Biden should look for another running mate because Kamala Harris is even more unpopular than he is. Right now, all of a sudden, she's more popular than Biden and possibly Trump. Like, I don't buy it, right? I think that the powers that be on that side really don't want to lose the House and the Senate and the presidency, right? They don't want to have Kamala Harris for 8 years. Anyone who thinks they want Kamala Harris in office for 8 years is insane. They want one of the rock stars on their side, rock stars that you mentioned. They want someone like a Newsom or a Whitmer, right, to go the full, or Shapiro to go the full 8, and hopefully they'll have Congress back in one of those terms, right? That's what they really want. So I almost think this was like a throwaway because Tim Walz is an awful candidate too, awful. And Kamala Harris, I don't care what anyone says, god awful, and she cannot. I'm dying to see what she says. How can she distance herself from the Biden-Harris administration and her own words from the last presidential cycle when she was a candidate in the primary?
It's going to be very hard to do, and the way you do that goes along with sort of my final thought for the show, and I'll let you have yours. You're going to get the last word on this one, pal. Thank God you were on this one and to explain everything, because this is probably the most education I've gotten about anything concerning the National Guard that I've seen in anything in the media. And believe me, I'm going to be pushing this out hard. But this sort of leads me to my final thought here, and it's that, and we discussed this a little bit before, seems like the Kamala Harris School of Campaigning says, keep Kamala away from a live hot mic as much as possible. Kamala Harris hasn't done an interview since she's been the designee of the Democrat Party. You have the convention coming up. It's going to be all staged and preened and proper and all that. It's going to be very scripted. And we're still waiting for Kamala Harris to have an extemporaneous thought on the 2024 campaign trail. This is done intentionally because Kamala Harris is sort of the perfect mock-up of a candidate. If you wind her up and set her out there and tell her exactly what to do, she'll do it. But if left to her own devices and to her own words, you end up with word salads. You end up with the shoulder movement that you were talking about a few episodes ago. You end up with the cackling. And that's what they're desperately trying to avoid. So right now it's a love-in fest with Kamala Harris with very scripted speeches, stump speeches being repeated ad nauseum in different places. That's becoming even noticeable to the media. And I'm thinking that when Kamala Harris is left to speak on her own, that's when you're going to start to see the polls shift a little bit, because then you'll know the honeymoon's over. You got the last word here, pal. It's all yours.
I'm going to sort of recycle one that I've used in the past. Since you mentioned Democratic Party rock stars, the Republican Party has an amazing bench, and we have a lot of rock stars too. The only problem that I see is that none of them are Donald Trump. We have to win this election. The Republican Party, I think, could survive post-Trump, but they can't survive post-Trump if Trump doesn't win right now. None of them. Like, I love guys like Ted Cruz and Byron Donalds, but I don't see the enthusiasm to support a guy like that because Donald Trump will do the things we want to do. He's talking about eliminating the Department of Education. Republicans have said this for decades. None of them will do it. I think Trump will do it, right? So the Republican Party's in a lot of trouble post-Trump. You got to get on board and support Trump. I support this man so much that I'm already starting the Trump 2028 fucking campaign.
Yeah, I asked you about that.
Lose or draw, I'm supporting Trump in 28. Don't care about the Constitution on this one.
But which Trump you talking about?
Donald J.
Okay.
I don't care.
Hold on a second. Does Donald Jr. also have the same middle initial? I don't know.
That would be interesting. Obviously, I support Don Jr. too, or Eric. They're both great guys. But Donald Trump is the party right now. I would actually be happy if the Republican Party disintegrated after this election if Trump doesn't win and he forms his own party. Who else? I'll leave it with this, Gene. Who else is going to get Elon Musk, Antonio Brown, and a whole bunch of other cast of characters to endorse a Republican candidate? It's like unheard of.
It's a cultural phenomena that what Trump has created here. The question becomes, who takes up the mantle afterwards? Or does the Republican Party backslide into the spineless, feckless party that existed pre-Trump? We'll see what happens as we go through this election cycle. But I think, pal, it's time to shut this thing down. What do you say?
Gene, shut this mofo down. It's getting late.
All right. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, especially everybody tuning in later on in the show. You guys are really cool for finding us here. Everybody popping in and out. Really appreciate all of you. But we got to get to our lives again. We got to shut this mother effer down. And there's only one way to do that behind enemy lines. Play our motherfucking anthem, baby. We'll see you guys next week.
Don't let them have sway. Conservative battalions walking them out, marching through the streets while the buffoons all shout. Move in the shadows, flag on my chest, repping my clan, putting faith to the test. 'Cause